Welcome back. All right, so New York Islanders. Yep. Talking about teams that lost in the first round, I finished that up with the New York Islanders, and then I wait seeing who gets knocked out of the second round so we can talk about them. But the New York Islanders, the storyline for them, I felt like I needed to go back to May 22nd, 2018. Lou Lamoriello's hired as general manager. And depending on who you are, you might believe that he's been brilliant as general manager, or you might think he's been terrible. There is, of course, that position where you might be in the middle on that, but it makes sense to be in the middle since the Islanders have been right around the middle of the NHL over the last couple of seasons. And so the question then becomes one of, do you want to keep, trying to stay as a playoff team and try to eke out a spot maybe as a wild card, or do you want to go through some kind of a little retool? I don't think they need a full-on rebuild, but this is an older roster, and they're going to need to get some more young players in here, whether that's via trade or if it's from within, we'll see. But yeah, going back to 2018, 2019, the first year without John Tavares, they played pretty well. 48, 22, and 7 record with 103 points. They get to the second round. I believe they swept Pittsburgh in the first round before they got swept in the second round by Carolina. Sometimes rounds just end very, very quickly. 2019, 2020, they finished 35, 23, and 10. That was their record at the time of the pause. They had 80 points. They lost in the conference final against Tampa Bay in 6. And probably the toughest opponent that Tampa Bay had in the bubble playoffs. 2021, they finished 32, 17, and 7 in the season where you're just playing your divisional opponents. They have 71 points. They get all the way to the semifinal where they lose against Tampa Bay again. This time it takes 7 games for Tampa Bay to take them out. And it's a hotly contested series both years against Tampa Bay. So for the Islanders, it would make sense for them to feel like, we're not far off. This is a team that could very well win a championship. But 2021, 2022, not so kind. 37, 35, and 10 record, 84 points, and no playoffs. So for the New York Islanders, 2022, a major disappointment. But they go right back into the playoffs in 2023. 2022, 2023, they finished 42, 31, and 9, 93 points. And then they lost in the first round against Carolina in 6. This year, 39, 27, and 16. They actually increased by 1 point in their overall standing. 94 points, and then they lose in the first round against Carolina, this time in 5. So the record over the time that Lou's been the general manager, I'll get that out eventually, but outside of those back-to-back runs to the Final Four in 2020 and 2021, it's been a mixed bag. It's absolutely been a mixed bag. But those conference final and semifinal appearances definitely had people thinking, hey, this team's tough to beat in the playoffs. Since then, though, they've been out in the first round twice and they missed the playoffs once. Their top scorer this year, Matthew Barzal. 80 games, 23 goals, 57 assists, 80 points. I think Barzal's capable of 90 to 100 points, to be honest. I think he's a fantastically talented player. Dobson, 79 games, 10 goals, 60 assists, 70 points. That's how you develop a defenseman, I guess. It's interesting, too, because I remember when Dobson was being healthy scratched regularly, and the opinion at the time was that the Islanders were ruining his development, and it turned out they didn't. So it was an odd way they did it with Dobson, but it worked. Brock Nelson, 82 games, 34 goals, 35 assists, 69 points. Almost the exact same totals as Horvat. Nelson's contract is up next year. We'll see what happens with his contract when it's up next year. I can't see him being anywhere other than the New York Islanders, though. I'd be very surprised if he moved on. The only player 22 and younger to appear on this roster this year, Holmstrom. Yeah, that's it. 75 games, 15 goals, 10 assists, 25 points. So they don't have like a wealth of really good young talent. I was looking too. William Dufour didn't have the kind of season that I think they might have wanted. His offensive numbers didn't jump up in the AHL. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see with the New York Islanders what the path forward looks like, because it is an older roster that they played for them this year. The 32 and older crowd, you have Nelson, Palmieri, Lee, Cizikas, Clutterbuck, and Martin. Yep, the whole identity line. And I think we're at the point now where the question becomes, okay, do they need to maybe change out who's in the identity line? They'll have a chance this summer to change it. Bortuzzo and Varlamov as well in the 32 or older range, which brings us to the goaltending. And I wanted to mention the goaltending a bit separately from how I've done this with other teams. Sorokin had a bit of a rough year. 25, 19, and 12 record, 908 save percentage. For most goalies, 908 would be good, but for Sorokin, it's not up to par. But Varlamov was excellent, 14-8-4 with a 918 save percentage, and in the playoffs, he was their starting goaltender. Down the stretch, it was clear Patrick Waugh had more faith in Varlamov than Sorokin. I don't think that carries over into next year. I think it's still going to be Sorokin's net next season, but that tandem should be staying together, and we'll see whether or not Patrick Waugh deploys them any differently than Lane Lambert did before his ouster, and how that turns out. Like, does Varlamov play 40 games and Sorokin 42? That kind of thing, right? So we'll see. They're pending UFAs. It's an interesting list, led by Clutterbuck. Matt Martin's on the list as well. Carson Kuhlman. So if you didn't know Carson Kuhlman was an Islander, now you know. Riley, Bortuzzo, Aho, and Salo. All defensemen. I think Riley's the one that's most likely to be kept by the New York Islanders, but cap space. Cap space is an issue. Their pending RFAs are going to eat into that too. You have Wahlstrom. I would not, honestly, at this point, be entirely surprised if the Islanders didn't give Wahlstrom a qualifying offer and he became an unrestricted free agent. It's just, it's not working there. Holmstrom, good run for him, but again, with 15 goals and 10 assists, probably just a 2-year contract for him. Ishikov looked good in his call-up at the end of the season. I was honestly kind of surprised he didn't play more in the playoffs because I think there's some creativity there. Yes, there's that risk too with a young player and turnovers, but I think he's got some offensive talent. McLean was good. Chalowski. So if you're wondering, whatever happened to Chalowski? Yep, Islander there as well. McLean, I think, played well enough. He's probably going to get a 2-year extension, probably a 1-year or one-way contract, I should say, for him as well. But the one factor that stands out with the New York Islanders is cap space. On July the 1st, they have $4,737,500. So in a summer where a lot of teams have a lot of money to spend, the Islanders don't. They don't have it. So if they're going to move a contract, it's not going to be easy if Lou decides I want to create more cap space. And I'm not saying Lou will. Lou's really stayed to basically not the same crew, but a very similar crew from one year to another. I think both to the benefit and the detriment of the team at the same time, if that makes sense. There's maybe some players he should have moved on from and didn't, and there's other players that he didn't give up on and good. They turned out to be pretty good for him. But Barzell's contract at $9.15 million until 2031, I think that can be justified right now. He's a young player. He's a point-per-game player. Honestly, like I said, his numbers could get better next year. Bo Horvat's contract, $8.5 million cap hit until 2031, so that's 7 more years. 81 games, 33 goals, 35 assists, 68 points. I think Horvat's been fine. I think you can pencil him in for at least 30 to 35 goals again next season, maybe around 70 points, because he had 68 this year. He could end up in 70, 72, maybe 75. Fine. But the reality is there isn't really that star on this team, that guy who drives the offense. You look at the teams that are still playing, you can usually point to one player and say that guy really can drive the offense. And while Horvat can on some level, and he's helped them definitely in the face-off circle, they just don't seem to have that superstar player in a playoff game that's going to make that difference for them. Anders Lee, $7 million cap hit for 2 more seasons. 81 games, 20 goals, 17 assists, 37 points. If you go by advanced stats, he was one of the unluckier players this year. That expected goals were much higher than the 20 he put up. But he does still get to 20 goals, but it's $7 million for his cap hit. That is high. He is, of course, their captain as well. Pajot, $5 million cap hit till 2026. He had 11 goals, 22 assists, 33 points. I don't think Pajot's been exactly what they've wanted offensively. Defensively, he's still a very good forward. Engvall, this is the contract that a lot of people shook their heads at when it was signed. It's a $3 million cap hit until 2030. I think it's just that Lou Lamoriello doesn't want to talk contracts. He just gives everybody long-term contracts just because he doesn't want to have to worry about it again. 74 games for Engvall, 10 goals, 18 assists, 28 points. Wow, I gave him 23 points with 10 goals and 18 assists. Man. For the record, this is my 3rd take, so I'm going to change that. That's the farthest I've gotten in any of my takes. That's generally the rule, is that if I find something at the start that I need to update or change, I'll do another take. But if it's towards the end, I'm like, is it really that big a deal? For Engvall, no, I fixed it. I apologize for the 5 points I deducted. I did make it right. Dobson's a restricted free agent next year. He's going to get paid. Dobson, if he puts up another season of almost a point per game, he's going to make some serious cash. Sorokin's $8.25 million cap hit till 2032 is perfectly fine if he plays the way that we know that he can. And this season was not that year for him. So we'll see if he bounces back next season. Mayfield's contract a bit high, $3.5 million cap hit until 2030. And I only say a bit high because this year he only played the 41 games. He had 5 assists for that $3.5 million cap hit. You want to see him playing a lot. Otherwise, who knows? Maybe LTIR ends up being used at some point by this team next year. Not saying necessarily for Mayfield, but when you've only got $4.7 million in cap space, and you've got Holmstrom to re-sign, McLean to re-sign, and even if those guys both get, say, $800,000, that still takes $1.6 million off of the amount of cap space they have. So if Lou Lamoriello wants to improve things on this team and add somebody, he's probably going to need to move a contract out. I just have those contracts up there. I don't know that any of those end up getting moved. I don't think they do. Again, Lou, if anything, has been kind of stubborn. He does things his way. And when people are like, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Yeah, do you want to get fired?" And he to the point where he's still got the facial hair thing. If you're going to be employed by the Islanders, you can't have facial hair. It's one of the weirdest things. It really is Mr. Burns and the sideburns. It's like that. When it works and the team makes the conference final, everybody talks up Lou and how smart he is and how well he puts together a team. But when the team is, middling and they're out in the first round, there will be criticisms of the way Lou conducts business and keeps the team in the playoffs. But they do have all of their own draft picks this year, except for the third round draft pick. And next year they have all their own draft picks. So they haven't stockpiled draft picks. They also haven't traded draft picks at the deadline either. So the Islanders is just kind of slow and steady. Sometimes slow and steady wins the race, but not always. I always think it's interesting when people say slow and steady wins the race. Actually, it's a race. So slow kind of means you may not win it. But I totally understand what people mean by that. I think that's more of a marathon than a sprint. Let's say looking at 10 years in the NHL is a marathon. The regular season can be a marathon. But the summer's a bit of a sprint. You're kind of doing a sprint to get your free agents, get everybody signed, and get ready because training camp's upon you before you know it in September. So I don't know what the answer is for the Islanders. We'll see what happens. Maybe Patrick Waugh can get more goals out of this team. Maybe he can help figure out what's going on with Sorokin and get him back to where he should be. And they'll be an interesting team to watch this summer because they don't have a ton of cap space. They'd likely have to move money out to bring somebody in. But maybe Lou looks at this team and goes, you know what, we'll be fine. He lets guys go to market, and he's like, we'll find guys in the AHL. We'll do some adding here and there. We'll be fine. And that would be the most Lou thing to do, wouldn't it? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.